Hello friends, welcome to my channel. Welcome to Dev with Excel. Alright, so in this video, we shall be solving exercise 3.5. This. In the previous video, we solved exercise 3.4 and that's involved creating the HTTP delete request so that we could delete an entry from the data, right? And also we used the Thunder client to help test our backend, right? What is suggested here is to use a Postman or the REST client. We previously used the REST client. Looking at this code here, we use the REST client and we saw how we could use the REST client, right? But I mentioned that I prefer to use Thunder client for small projects as this, right? So it's just for us to test the backend. As long as the backend works, that's fine. All right, so you can still choose to use Postman or REST clients. That's your choice. But in this video and coming videos, we shall be using Thunder clients, right? Okay, so I am going to show us how to use the Thunder client as well. All right, so in exercise 3.5, it says expand the backend so that new phone book entries can be added by making HTTP post request to the address. Now, this address, right? It also says generate a new ID for the phone book entry with the Math.random function. Use a big enough range for your random value so that the likelihood of creating duplicate IDs is small. All right, so let's head into our code implementation. So as we can see here, this is step 5 setup folder, right? That's for exercise 3.5. You can see step 5. So we are simply going to be working with this folder. That means I'll simply just close all these files here and then I will just launch this file here for step 5. All right, and also cd into step 5 if you are not currently there. Okay, so here we are currently in step 5, right? So we simply just do npm run dev here to run the server. Let's be sure that the server runs. All right, so it says server is running successfully. All right, so let's head into the implementation for this exercise 3.5. All right, so I think before then, let's just run the request we made in the previous videos, right? So let's come to Thunder clients and then let's check for the get. Let's see if we can get this data by clicking on the send button. All right, so we still have this working. Let's try the delete. Let's delete the data with the ID of 1 such that every other data comes up except the data with the ID of 1. So that's exactly what we have here. So if we delete the data with the ID of 3, every other data with ID 1, 2, and 4 gets returned except for 3. All right, so we can see we have 1, 2, and 4. All right, we are going to be using this post request. Let me just delete this because I think I need to show us how to do that. All right, so let's head into the code implementation for exercise 3.5. So let's create the post request. So we could just come here above this delete a single person and then we say app.post, and then inside this post is going to accept the URL. Here we have API/persons, right? So we say /API/persons, and then this also accepts a callback. A callback is going to accept the parameters request and response, which is rec and res in our own case. All right, so the first thing we want to do is we want to target the data coming from the user, this data, right, coming from the user. So we are going to be saying rec.body. That's rec.body. Here, the rec here, it represents the request, right? So this is simply a request made by the user. That's why we are saying rec.body. The body here is represent the data being passed by the user. So we assign this to a variable name. Let's call it body, something like this. Then after this, what we want to do is we want to assign the ID to a randomly generated value. So we are not going to be passing our ID ourselves. Here we can see that here the IDs are passed, right, by themselves, right? This is hard coded. right? But here we want to pass IDs that are not hard coded. So we simply just target the ID from this body. Like I said, this body represents each of these data, right? It represents the persons, right? So we could just come here and say body.id. That's more like saying persons.id, right? Body.id equals, now this is going to be equal to a randomly generated value. So let's just write something like this, generated ID, and something like this. Now, this is going to be a function we shall be defining soon. This function is going to help us to generate random values, and we pass it as the IDs for each of the data, right? So that's it. So let's save this. Then after this, what we want to do is we want to concatenate this body that is passed in by the user to the overall person's data here. So what we can do here is simply we just say persons dot concat, then in bracket we pass the body data here, right? So we can assign this to a variable name called persons. That means that this persons, which is this here, gets updated by concatenating the body coming from this user. That's what it means. And after this, we send these persons, right? We say res.send persons, right? Now, when we do this is going to send the data of the user and add it to this, right? So the next thing we want to do is we want to implement this function that helps us to generate random values. Before then, let's put a status code. The status code here is going to be 201, which simply means that a new entry has been created, right? All right, now let's define this function. So coming here, we could just say const generated ID and something like this. Then we want to check the length of the data, right? Here we can see that we have 4 data in this, right? So we want to say this is a conditional statement using the ternary operator now. So we say persons dot length greater than 0. So here we are trying to say that if the persons dot length is greater than 0, it simply means that if the data is not empty, you want to generate a random value. That's maths.floor. Then we say maths.random. Then putting this, and then we say times. Now, it's said in the instruction here that we should create a big enough range for our random value. So we can use something like 200, right? So the idea is that if we use a small number like 10, we might be getting values that are also 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, and we don't want that. We want values that are different from this, right? So we want values that should be after, that should not be 1, 2, 3 or 4, right? So we can start with 5. So we are simply going to do something like this, 200 in brackets, then we say minus 5 plus 1. Then after this part here, what we are going to put here is we are going to simply put, I think 5. Yes. So this means that if the data is not empty, we assign a random value to the ID, else we just set the value to 0, right? So we can assign this ternary operation to a variable called, let's call it max ID, something like this, right? So we are going to be returning this max ID and say plus 1. So let's save this. Okay, so I think there's something wrong here. Yes. Okay, here we have math.random, something like this. Here is supposed to have a plus. All right. So um, let's use the post request to test this. So here we simply just come back to the Thunder client and we create a post request. We come here, and since this is the folder for our request, right, we click on this triple dot, and then we select the new request, and then we call it posts. Now this post, we are going to pass in an endpoint, right? So we could just copy the endpoint of delete, and then we update it. So we could just pass this here, remove the /3, and then change this get by clicking on this drop down and select post. Then we hit the send. Oops. Okay, so here we are getting cannot set properties of undefined setting ID. Let's go back to our code to be sure of what is happening. Okay, so here we understand that in our post here, we need to what? We need to put in data coming from the user, right? So we come here, we select body, and we do something like this. Now, we understand that the data, it contains ID, name, and number. ID, name, and number. So we could just come here and then say name. So let's call this name blue green, and then the number, you could just do something like this. Let's say 02-567. Then let's click on send. Now we are not going to be putting the ID here because the ID is going to be randomly generated, right? Now let's hit on send again. Okay, so this is not working. So what we can do here is we need to use a middleware. The middleware, and that's the JSON from the express. So we say app.use and say express.json, something like this, right? Okay, so let's go back to the post and then let's hit the send key. All right, so we can see that we have this and we have blue green returned with ID 133. All right, so with this, I think we've been able to solve exercise 3.5, and then see you in the next video. Bye.